Thank you. I have no idea what he said, but I hope it was good. Uh, I'm sorry I don't speak French because I understand so many words or so few words that I at least know that there have been many of the talks, both yesterday and today, have a very interesting topics and you discuss fascinating things. And sometimes, like the last paper, you have examples that it's possible for me to follow. I'm working at the University of Oslo. The last 5 years I've been working on a research project called Clouds and Concerts, and which deals with the music in the cloud, streaming, digital part of it, and also concerts. Or festival and festivalization of music that we've seen, especially the last decade or two. I have been working mostly with the clouds part of the project, and my colleague who's at the music department, I'm in the media studies, my colleague Anne Danielsen, she's been responsible for heading the concerts, the live part of the project. And we've also been working together and try for some of our research to look at these things together, but not always. And we've been about 20 people working on it, and we're finishing now. What I thought I would do today, the title, Streaming: A Challenge for the Future of Music, is try to put on a semi-critical hat and look at the possible challenges for the future, asking questions like, are there aspects with streaming, music streaming as technology, and with the user interface and the ways that people use streaming services that might lead to certain patterns of use that might threaten music, at least part of music, as we see today, and in some aspects at least. And I'll start with this image. I'm from the north, so this is where we go swimming. This is an illustration. You all know the kind of iceberg effect. That's a tenth of it is above water, and the huge part of it is below. And this kind of illustrates streaming, because I forgot to say that, but we have gotten access to user files from the music streaming service Wimp Music, which has been rebranded and bought by Jay-Z and is now called Tidal, and which is currently has 1 million subscribers, but when we started working with them, started from a modest 100,000 when it was launched in 2010, and then around 580,000 when we did our last data gathering. And we've gotten data from them for over 4 years, the same period. And it's become richer and richer possibility to analyze streaming, because we have, in the period we've been studying, all the usage of all the users, while they're still anonymized, but we have some demographic data. But mostly we just are able to study how people are using and listening to music in everyday life in a new way that we previously in research didn't get access to in those numbers, at least, without we could do qualitative studies, and we have done a lot of that in our project as well. We could observe people, we could ask people how they were using their services, but didn't really get the kind of broad overview that we get today. So we, for instance, wouldn't have no idea of knowing how much people listen to the records they bought and took home and how they listen to them. But now today we know that, in a couple of months, which is the data I'm showing here, 90% of the music is never streamed, not once. 90% of the artists. This iceberg is about 1.6 million different artists, and we're a small country with 5 million people, and so there's almost you could have roughly 2 household artists, unique household artists per capita in Norway. So it's a huge amount of music available, but we only listen to part of it. And of the part we listen to, the 10% we listen to, or the users listen to, about the third of it is streamed once. And the tiny tip of the iceberg there, 1% of artists that are streamed account for 77% of all streams. So there is a very, very kind of sharp funneling of streaming towards some artists. And this is basically sums up what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to try to explore some different aspects with the technology and the usage that lead us to this kind of tip of the iceberg. And I'm hoping that it will make sense. Not all the things I'm going to talk about are equally important. They might not even be working together, but I'll try to see if and how they might do that. Okay, so let's start first with streaming technology, how we listen to it. And over the years that we looked at it, mobile has become the most important entry technology through technology to the music. Now, in 2013, which was the last year we had data from, 2 out of every 3 streams comes from a mobile phone. And it's, it's sometime during 2012, mobile became the most used device. And that has some consequences because, as you see here, a mobile screen has a lot less screen real estate than a large screen. So there are fewer ways there are into streaming, and there are certain ways of listening that become more important when we listen on a device like that. One is search. To the right there you see a screenshot of my mobile telephone. When I type in the letter A, they have so-called predictive search in WIMP. So immediately when I at that time typed in A, it suggests, do you mean Adele? Or do you mean Admiral P, which is a Norwegian artist, or various artists, which is the second most popular artist in WIMP after Justin Bieber, the various artist guy. He's very, very good. Yeah, so you see what happens is that already at the first touch of a key, you get suggestions that might lead you in a certain direction. And I'll come back to the social part of that, how we are influenced by what other people do. But now I'm just going to talk about the technology first. So already in 2012, most of the searches came from a mobile phone. And as you remember, in 2013 there were more streams, but I don't have the stream search numbers here. But we see that if we look at the heavy searchers and compare it to the light searchers, the ones that search very little and the ones that search the most, we see that the main difference is that iOS users, mobile Apple iPhone users, search a lot more than the others. You see, for instance, Android users, they have roughly the same search patterns, the light searchers and the heavy searchers. And part of that reason, I believe, is that the mobile software for Android and iPhone are different, and search has the search is much better. The predictive search is better on iOS, so it becomes more useful for the users. On an Android, you have to type. You don't have the same predictive search. So you have to type more letters, and as you know, using a small screen on a mobile phone without getting suggestions, it's sometimes hard. You type more mistakes and all those things. So it's not as useful for Android users as iPhone users. And you also see that the heavy searchers, they also stream a lot more than the ones that search little. Talking about going to another affordance, another part of what using different devices might influence in our behavior. Let's look at skipping. You know, when you don't finish the song, when you just listen to part of it and then move to the next one. On a mobile phone, this is from 6 in the morning to 5. This is the day, a typical day. You see that the mobile share of or fraction of skipping is much higher than when you listen on a desktop. Mobile phones, in many senses, function as kind of remotes. We're used to using remotes. It's easy to skip. You could either skip with your finger, or you could, if you're listening with a headset, you could just tap twice and then you go on to the next song. So it's easy to do, and you're in a mode often, the context of use with a mobile phone, that is different than when you're sitting down or you're putting on a playlist in your living room, walking around, those things. So we see that almost every other song on average is skipped on a mobile phone. 0.5 of every song, and you see at some points of the day, like in the evening, it's much higher, the skipping rate. And it's associated with, when we look at other behavior, we see that it's often associated with searching for new things to listen to and adding it to a playlist, for instance, or being at the party. The peak of skipping is Saturday nights, and people use their mobiles as the jukebox. They skip around for, oh, what am I going to listen to? Let's put this on. We're at the party. So it's often part of a social experience, but we use it as a skipping device. When we look at album listening, if people listen in sequence the different tracks within an album, or if they skip between different types of artists and different songs from different albums, we see that actually mobile users are much more in an album mode than people who are not listening in a mobile. And that might be surprising, because you would maybe think that they were restless. You have the device there, you could just go to the next one and skip. But the way many people use it is that when they listen to an album and want to know, is this something for me? Am I going to like this? Do I want to add it to a playlist? They start with the first song in an album, and they just listen. Oh, okay, I'll skip to the next one. Is this good? Oh, skip to the other one. So it's easy to kind of just use the suggested sequence of songs that an album suggests to you, or a playlist that you find, and just go on from there, instead of kind of listening to a shuffle mode or a random mode where you tell the phone or the device to kind of rearrange the sequence according to some random algorithm. And I just added this slide after I heard Philip yesterday saying that the youth were part of the kind of main focus that they were looking at in his project, and we see also that there's of course age differences, and one of the interesting things is that the people under 25, we only have very broad age categories because of very strict privacy rules. But people under the age of 25, they're much less likely to listen in an album mode than people that are older, because they have a tendency to listen more to playlists and less to albums in entirety. They haven't grown up with LPs and CDs in the same way that people that are 30, 40 have, but have kind of grown into being teenagers and young adults in a situation where the album was already broken down. You could buy or download the individual songs. Now, let's move on to something that is relating more directly to the tip of the iceberg, as I showed you earlier. This is when we look at the stream, the track numbers for all albums that we have available. We see that track 1 is listened to a lot more than track 2 and track 3, and it's a kind of very sharp falling curve, and it's fairly linear. So the number 1 track on average is listened to 3 times more than a number 2 track, and tracks number 1, 2, and 3 together, they account for 50% of all streams. So the way that we use our devices, and also the way that we have been presented songs in the same way as it's been presented earlier, i.e. in album formats, you have there's no kind of affordance in streaming that makes it necessary to put 12 songs within the same image and say this is an album and this is the sequence. But all the streaming services have this possibility to, okay, these are the songs, and this is presented as belonging to the same entity. And when people are browsing and searching and getting access to things, and listening to new things, they tend to start from the beginning and then listen on. And this of course has consequences for when it comes to which artists are then on the top when you start searching and all those things. So if we look at genres, it's the same thing across genres. It's small variations. You would maybe think that, okay, classical music, you always listen in the sequence and you hear it maybe through the record, but it's not any different between, or it's not really an difference between classical music and other. If we look from track 2 and on, if we just take away track 1, because a lot of the track 1s are either singles or very short albums, but if we look only at number 2 and on, we see that it's still the falling curve in all genres. So let's try to link this to social behavior, as I talked about. In the streaming services, I have mostly screenshots which are impossible to see here from WIMP, but a couple are also from Spotify here. But the point is that there are all sorts of algorithms within the services that are based on other users' behavior. And it's not necessarily users we know, but sometimes it could be. It could be, for instance, linking into Facebook and seeing what your friends listen to. Or it could be a collaborative playlist in Spotify where you work with other listeners and you share the same playlists. But it could be and it could be that you follow certain people, whether you know them or not, that you want to see what they listen to. But most of the time, it's in the form of ranks. For instance, you have the top 20 songs in WIMP right at the moment, or the top 20 albums. You have the most popular songs. If you say I type in Daft Punk. First of all, I get the most popular songs and albums already when I start typing that, based on what other people are listening to. And if I go into Daft Punk, I see the songs that are most popular. I can sort them after popularity rank. I could, of course, then also sort after number 1, 2, 3. You have the possibility to sort in different ways. But when you're looking for some popular song, you could sort after what other people listen to, or you could just start from the beginning, as I already talked about. Now, there are some ways that we work as social beings that I think are interested as possible explanations for how we end up with the tip of the iceberg. And one is the role of strong and weak ties. Mark Granovetter, he published an article in the beginning of the 70s, which became very influential and is one of the most cited, again, ranks social science articles. And he talked about the role of the strength of weak ties. We all have strong social ties. There are very few of them that, you know, our close family and people we see often and have an emotional engagement with. But you might meet people at the conference that are weak tie, we like them, but we don't see them every day, or you meet people that you went to school with, etc. We have much more. We have more weak ties than strong ties. And of course, with the internet, what Granovetter showed is that the weak ties are most important when you try to find a new job, because the small amount of close, strong ties, you know about the same things. But when you meet weak ties, they have different information. You haven't met them in a while. They might know about some job that you haven't heard about before. So the strength of weak ties becomes important when you search for new information and new jobs and stuff like that. And since then, of course, this was based on very, very scant empirical evidence and mostly a theoretical piece. But since then, we have the opportunity to study big data, for instance. And there's an interesting article by some researchers both within Facebook and outside in the academic community, apprécie-t-on, from 2012, and then looked at 350 million Facebook users and seeing, okay, what's the most important for seeing and sharing comments, messages, pictures, and threads, not music, but they kind of find very strong support for Granovetter's theory based on a huge empirical material. Since then, there are also other articles that highlight other features that Granovetter and Bakshi didn't look at. And one is the structural diversity in social contagion. Mark Granovetter, his kind of thought was that there are much more people in our weak tie community. So the size of your network, that's important, that you have many weak ties and you get the information. But Ugander and colleagues in also 2012, they also looked at Facebook data and they found that for virality, social contagion, it's not the size that's the most important. The most important is the structural diversity, that you get information from very different parts of your social network. Let me just ask you quickly, anyone here have heard about Gangnam Style? Yes. Okay, who hasn't heard about Gangnam Style? Okay, we'll talk later. But when you get people, not only your daughter or a teenage son telling you about Gangnam Style, but your uncle and some weird professor at the conference, or you get very different people, you know, mentioning Gangnam Style, and have you checked out this YouTube, or you see it shared on Facebook by very, very different people, then you're more likely to, okay, I'll have to check this out then. And I'm sure you're going to go home and Google Gangnam Style, because now everyone else has heard it. But, you know, having the structural, diverse network, having people that are very different, sharing the same information, that is very, very important for something to spread and become viral. So, on the one side, structural diversity, and you have another part, which is cumulative effects of social influence. This is Salgenik and Watts. Watts is one of the people that's been working mostly with the kind of network effects of different things, from the spread of virus to why does the electrical circuits suddenly overload and shut down, and how are these things spread on the internet. And what they did was they had a fairly large experiment. They had 14,000 people that they divided into different social worlds that they had no idea what the other people were listening, but they gave them, some of them were given artists to listen to that they had never heard about, where you could see how many downloads they had before and how many people had listened to them. And others were given the same list, but without seeing how many times this song had been listened to. And then they followed and looked at how does this spread and which artists rise up to the top of the list or different lists. And they showed that, first of all, different songs spread in different worlds, but it's always an effect of, if you see what other people are listening to, that influences you whether or not you want to or not. So if you start planting false likes or false statistics on songs, they also stream better than the ones with the real numbers. And so I think that these two things, together with what I talked about, the weak ties, they influence how we listen to when we're giving this a massive amount of music, the possibilities that are basically endless. Still, social streaming streaming is not only social, it's also a very personal aspect. And for very many of us, we don't like to share, and we don't like oversharing of music and sharing in the same way as we do with pictures or other things. A few researchers, two of my colleagues, Hagen and Lyders, they have explored this further based on the 23 focus groups that we have. We talked to about 120 people and asked them about how they listen to music, live music, how they share music, how they use streaming services, and they found that the personal part of it and also personalization of the streaming services is very important to the people that use it. An example from my own research is that when we look at all the playlists and what their names are, 82% of them are unique. I mean, over hundreds of thousands of different playlists, 82% are unique. So when you make a playlist, you have a very personal, individual relationship to that playlist, and you don't just call it Justin Bieber, you give it some name that reflects on the context in your personal way of using that. It might be that you're training in the fall, or that these are summer songs, and you give that a personal name. So we can also see this in the kind of big data that we're looking at. But still, while there is personal and personalization in the services, we also get influenced by these social effects that I've been talking about. For instance, in the case of events, or what I call event-based listening, let's just look at the case of the Øya Festival, which is one of the biggest music festivals in Norway, and the relationship between what is posted as the official playlist or official artist by the WIMP streaming service in cooperation with the festival organizers. They present a playlist, and they presented this in March, and then you immediately see that a lot of users are creating playlists with the same artist and the same sometimes name as the one that was played or presented or promoted. And you can see when we follow stream of these artists that are playing at the we see that they're very closely connected to editorial events when it's pushed out and promoted in the player, and also related to the time just before the 4 festival days in August. When we look at the playlist streams, the purple one, compared to other streams of the same artist, we see that they are used in different ways. For instance, pre-listening, the listening period before the festival, the playlists, the editorial playlists have a larger role. before the festival, while people find during the festival, for instance, songs that they or artists they want to listen more to, and then they put them in their own playlist or just listen to an artist or and so on. And we see kind of similar effects for events with other big concerts. For instance, this is or events. This is Bruce Springsteen when he released an album called The Wrecking Ball. You see that streaming numbers skyrocket immediately, and then they drop off after a while, but then they then they spike again just before and during the 3 concerts that he holds in Oslo and Bergen in 2012. Rihanna, The Blue Curve, she released an album here in November, and we see that she's her own festival every weekend. Friday and Saturday she peaks. But then she also has a peak when she plays in Oslo in June. So we see that there are different events, both festivals, live events, but also releases that kind of increase streaming. And we can see other events. This is from Spotify. They looked at how does news about the comet landing and the Philae satellite influence streaming of Don't Mean a Thing by Aerosmith, which was featured in the movie Armageddon, with Bruce Willis, lands on the comet or whatever. And they find that not only does I'll put this on. So, not only does that song peak in relation to that particular news about the comet landing, but it also peaks whenever there are big news about some terrestrial object, some comet sighting. So events become very important because when you're giving the opportunity to listen to 1.5 million artists and 25 million songs, and you sit down or take your phone up, what am I going to listen to now? You're also influenced by what your mind is occupied with at the moment. A more sad example is the terror attacks in 2011 in Oslo and Utøya. There was one song in particular and several others that in the aftermath of that terror attack became kind of songs of solace or memorial songs for Norway. And one was called Mitt lille land, or My Small Country. And this was a song that wasn't really popular, but a lot of people knew about. It was made in 1994, and then it was re-released with another youth artist called Maria Mena, and remade a bit half a year or a couple of months before the terror attack. And if you see, during the night of the attack, there are a few red spots scattered around Norway. But a week later, the only green spots is where there are reindeer or icebergs or whatever, people not living there. The whole of the country was listening to that song after a week. And particularly when WIMP, this is the music player, how it looked in 2011, when they, on the Tuesday after, 4 days after the attack, they released a playlist called Trøsteliste, Songs of Solace, where that was the #1 song. And if you look at the streaming and search, and here I've added Google search because people were searching on Google and then trying to find it either on YouTube or a streaming service, and then went on from Google to somewhere else to listen to the song. You see the 22nd, the night of the attack, almost no one was searching for Mitt lille land, but it quickly peaked, especially after TV2, the second largest television channel. They started playing the video of Maria Mena singing that song between newscasts, and Maria Mena, on the day after the attack, she shared this song on her website and social media channels. And so it was both spread through large legacy media like television and through her 50,000 fans on Facebook and Twitter and what's that? The song SoundCloud? SoundCloud. And you see that searches within WIMP player had roughly the same pattern, but later than the Google searches. People, I think, are kind of hardwired into going first to Google when they search for some information on events, and then the streams were delayed and had a very high peak after the playlist was promoted by WIMP, and then you can see that it had small bumps in relation to memorial concerts and things like that. So there is a long tradition within popular music for having events as part of a strategy for promoting music, whether it's releases, tours, media appearances, etc. And I think, but events have a new role in today's streaming because let's go back to the time when you were young. Some of you are older than me, some younger, but at least if you put yourself back into a situation before streaming, you had a certain collection in your living room or wherever, or on your even your iPod, but you didn't have a music or a song that fit any type of situation. If an artist died that you didn't hear about, but everyone was lamenting and talking about, you couldn't immediately go and search for him or her and listen to them. 2 minutes. Wow. Says 10 on my clock, but anyway. So the possibility with streaming is that we can use it for searching for events, and both on a micro level where a lot do the same, or a micro level where, okay, what I'm going to listen to now, it's raining and it's fall, I'll listen to jazz. Some do, based on the weather. So event-based listening is also part of this that kind of drives it to new, to the same kinds of music. I'm going to skip a little bit here. This is a life of playlist where the point is that although some songs last a long time, most of the listening is done within the first few weeks overall. And when we look at old favorites versus new favorites or new songs, we see that people to a large extent look for new songs, but some listen to old music. And we see that on average a user listens to a lot of music, but some part of it is streamed more and account for the really big amount of streams. And only a few artists are streamed very, very many times. Which leads me to Pareto, the Italian economist. For many years, the laws of economy in music business have been dominated by the Pareto principle, where roughly 20% of releases account for 80% of the revenue. And this was also the case with listening habits with iPods. 23% of the songs that were on the devices of people were accounted for 80% of the plays on the iPods. Although I'm not talking about the economics here. But with streaming, as I said, 1% of artists count for about 77% of the revenue. So we have a very clear superstar or blockbuster economy, and very kind of cumulative effect towards listening to the same artist, where there are different, I think, aspects or factors leading to that. So the challenges so far is that we hear a lot of different music, but only some of it counts when it comes to money and what the artists get. And so, because we also listen to a lot of new music all the time, and the kind of long tail effect that Chris Anderson is talking about, just give the long tail enough time, then you get the revenue back. doesn't really work with music because we hear so much new all the time. Quickly through how the revenue model is, let's use the example of my daughter and myself. Let's say that she listens to 1,000 streams and I listen to 100 streams. The way it works is that this is collected together and then shared. So even though we pay the same amount, let's say I paid $10, she paid $10, 8 of my dollars or 9 of my dollars goes to what she listens to or the artist she listens to because of the pro rata system. And when these are the users of WIMP, where a lot of users hear a little bit of music, and then there are a few music listeners that hear an extreme amount, then you get the kind of very skewed shift of revenues, where some of the music that is streamed a lot have that get the extra money. So the pro rata model, it favors kind of the global blockbuster economy, and also the direct line that we used to have between I purchase something and an artist gets a cut of that, whether it's 10 or 12%. That kind of direct line is gone because of the pro rata model. I don't know if they will get the cut from my listening or not. Depends on how much I'm listening. And so this introduces a couple of challenges for liquidity, the possibility of giving new albums and stuff like that. But shortly, to sum up, who is it really a challenge for, the patterns I'm talking about now? It's certainly not a challenge for the major labels, the blockbusters, and the kind of legacy artists like Bruce Springsteen, who has a very strong, loyal fan base, who stream him immense amount when he releases something new or has a concert. And it's, at least in the short term, not a problem for the audience. When we talk to the audience, they love, this is the one thing they love most with streaming, that they have access to everything, anytime, anywhere. So it's great for many users if you think in a kind of short perspective. It's first of all a problem for a challenge for small labels and artists because of the lack of liquidity and also lack of predictability. If I release an album this month and Elvis comes back, it doesn't matter what my core audience listens to because everyone else is listening to something else. So kind of your value of your fans are totally dependent on other fans. And this is a challenge for many. It might be a problem for innovation in the future because there are certain genres and certain ways that really don't fit with the streaming economy. A 15-minute classical piece is awarded the same amount as a 3-minute pop song. So because of the pro rata model. So there are certain things that may be driving musicians to succeed in some senses that work better with the model, and others that really don't work. And it's a potential problem for local music, local genres, because the global blockbusters, they kind of dwarf the local music. But it might also be a problem for the public in the long term if this also means that there will not be produced interesting new music because there is only the kind of blockbusters that really make it worthwhile and can keep putting out albums in a sense. And ultimately, it might also be a problem for the streaming model because there might be a growing lack of trust with streaming as a system, and people might not be willing to pay for streaming. In Norway, we have a very fortunate situation now where we're the most valuable consumer in the world. Every person in Norway, on average, pays $24 to music per year, whereas, for instance, France is about $12 and China is 7 cents. So we also have the highest streaming number or share of people who are using streaming services, about 70%. And so the industry in Norway is turned around. It's growing again, and it's starting to be a very optimistic scene. But still, only very few artists are making it there. And this is, I think, some things we need to discuss, and I also have some suggestions for possibilities with the streaming model, using it as an economic platform to build on. But I'll drop that part of the talk to later, and I'll just go to this slide saying thank you. And these are the 7 people that have worked on the data crunching, because I couldn't do this alone, I'm useless. But we have mathematicians and physicians and data scientists among these groups, and economics. So we're very kind of interdisciplinary group that can do these big data studies together. And lastly, I'd like to have a plug for, we're having our our research project ends, and we're going to present findings and forecasts, hopefully, in March next year, and we're doing it in relation to the big music festival called Bylarm. One of the days is going to be at Bylarm, and then one of the days is going to be at the University with open invitation for anyone who wants to come, and doesn't cost anything. So if you're interested in hearing more, either about the qualitative or the quantitative part of it, you're very welcome. Thank you very much.